This is the latest from 7 News with Melissa Doyle.
Good evening and welcome. There's a real change in the air tonight. We've seen the most positive signs yet of a way out of this health and economic crisis. Among them, the planned easing of restrictions around schools, hospitals, even beaches. Health Minister Greg Hunt joins us to explain. Could you claim $10,000? Hundreds of thousands sign up to cash in on Super Monday. And royal scare. William and Kate speak about their fears when Prince Charles tested positive to COVID-19. The reopening of Australia will be gradual. It will happen in stages, and we got the first hint today of how it might unfold. A ban on elective surgeries could be lifted, closed beaches reopened for exercise, and there are plans to get schools back to near normal as soon as possible. Angela Cox has the details.
From coast to coast, deserted playgrounds and empty classrooms, a sign of these most unusual times. Here and around the world, virtual classrooms have become the norm.
I know that it's a weird time. I miss seeing all you guys.
But now New South Wales is keen to reopen schools as soon as possible.
What we are considering are options around a rostering system which will have some students go back on a particular day to increase that level of face-to-face.
The fine details are still being worked out, but the goal is to have fewer students at school at any one time. It's a blueprint others could follow. Looking further ahead, the PM has flagged retail outlets including shops and cafes will be the first to reopen when social restrictions are eventually eased.
Cafes and restaurants and so forth are an important part of our social fabric, and so we'd certainly be looking closely at that.
Another sign of the changing times is a proposal to reopen beaches.
Bondi Beach, that guy is swimming. Where is the police?
Bondi was the first to be closed, and keeping it that way has been a headache for police. The local council is considering whether residents should be allowed to exercise on the sand and in the surf, although health authorities are not on side.
Just let in a few people at a time, have a 5-minute dip, a 10-minute dip, run along the sand.
And hospital resources that had been diverted to respond to the pandemic are also under review. Beds set aside for coronavirus patients could soon be freed up for non-essential elective surgeries, including IVF. Well, to discuss further the easing of restrictions, earlier today I spoke with Health Minister Greg Hunt. Well, Minister, thank you so much for making the time today. I want to start by asking how likely it is that elective surgery, including IVF, will resume next week.
Elective surgery is being considered by the National Cabinet next week, and I have in fact literally come off a call just prior to this interview where we were discussing the potential for IVF, and I very specifically made the point that both the Prime Minister and myself would love to see IVF back to full operation in Australia. Now, for the first time, we're in a position to be able to consider progressively enabling more and more elective surgery. It will start with a first round, and that's being determined on priorities as it should be, but with IVF, absolutely one of those that's being considered.
When do we get to the point that we can ease up restrictions?
We've made huge progress, but now we want to make sure that we really clamp down on it, find any outbreaks. I'm hopeful that if the transmission rates remain low, we'll be able to progressively take gentle steps, I don't want to overstate it, but gentle steps which will allow us to get out. What we don't want to do is risk a second wave.
Absolutely, and nobody wants that either. But can I ask you just to give me maybe some examples? And I won't hold you to this, but what are you thinking could be top of the list?
So one of the things that will be maintained is the social distancing. That's absolutely critical. But it could be different types of activity. In some states, for example, things such as fishing and golf may not be allowed at the moment. If they can maintain the social distancing rules, and I think that is absolutely a part of the equation here, then that might be something that those individual states would allow. And as a country, wherever we can allow people to see each other, could be people who are isolated and alone being able to have a visitor or a pair of visitors. We've got to make sure that first and foremost we're protecting against a second wave, but if over the next 4 weeks we are able to achieve these continued low transmission rates tending towards zero, then that will give us the chance to really be a beacon, I think, not just for Australia, but a beacon for the world.
All right. And just lastly, World Health Organization, America's pulled funding. Our Prime Minister has said that we won't, but there's been some calls for it to at least be reviewed or maybe be a little conditional. Is that something that you would support?
So the funding is very important for the region, where they do really productive things such as polio, measles, malaria. We did have differences with the global leadership in terms of we called this as a disease of pandemic potential 10 days before they did. We put the China ban on and we were criticised by the World Health Organization. That's been one of the things which has helped save lives and protect lives. So we're making the decisions in our national interest. I think there will be, rightly, a review of what has happened in Geneva. The local work in our Pacific Basin, in and amongst our neighbours, has been very well done and very important. But I think there are a few questions for Geneva to answer as to why they were so slow in calling it a pandemic and why they opposed the sort of travel bans which have, I think, played a very important role in Australia being at the global forefront of positive outcomes for the population.
Yeah. Minister Greg Hunt, thank you for your time as always. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Mel.
Despite the possibility of restrictions being lifted in coming weeks, Queensland Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk has warned the state's tourism industry it could suffer for several years. Let's bring in Elliot Chipper in Brisbane. Elliot, the Premier has told Seven there will be a long road to recovery. Let's just take a look.
We're not going to see international tourism, I think, for at least a year. But that's not to say that we won't be able to generate some domestic tourism. The recovery is going to take years, Sharon. This is not going to be a quick fix.
So what kind of impact will this have on the state?
Mel, in a word, this is simply going to be heartbreaking for so many Queenslanders. The tourism industry generates $27 billion for Queensland and employs 1 in 10 Queenslanders. Now, it's not just the industries that are affected by international tourism, the tour groups and the hotels. It's the flow-on effect to the cafes, the restaurants, the shops that are in these tourism areas. Now, the Premier did allude to the fact that there could be some domestic tourism, but when that happens is still yet to be seen, with our borders still firmly closed and those travellers coming from interstate forced into 2-week quarantine. Mel?
Is there some talk that some particular areas could open sooner than others in Queensland?
Yes, Mel, the Premier did actually allude to that today. Of course, there are many parts of regional and remote Queensland that are still virus-free. But in those areas, they've been forced to shut down their economies, and that's really having a major impact on these small towns. Health experts have weighed in, saying that they could slowly ease restrictions in these areas, but, and it's a very big but, that would require more testing and more contact tracing as well. So many discussions for our health experts and politicians to have in the coming weeks. Mel?
Certainly. All right. Elliot Chipper in Brisbane. Thank you. COVID-19 cases at a New South Wales nursing home have doubled in just 24 hours. Let's bring in Chris Reason in Sydney. Rezo, this aged care cluster is causing serious concern.
Yeah, Mel, good evening to you. Awful numbers out of the Newmarch aged care facility out there at Caddens. Basically, in the space of just 24 hours, the number of positive tests at that aged care facility jumping 100%. Yesterday it was 15, today 30 people, 20 of them residents, 10 of them staff. Indeed, 7 News has been told of one family dealing with news that their grandmother has tested positive and is unlikely to survive through to Sunday. Now, another family that we've been tracking these last few days are so upset with the situation there, they're now talking about litigation. There is a lot of fear and concern about what's going to unfold these next few days, Mel.
And it's not just the elderly at risk, Rezo. One of the state's newest victims is an infant.
Mel, that infant was just 7 weeks old, a baby boy testing positive for COVID-19. He has now been obviously admitted to hospital His positive test took the case numbers in this state to 29 in this last cycle. There is only one figure that they've actually been looking forward to seeing increase, and that is the testing numbers, and indeed that has been happening. It's worth mentioning too that at the Royal North Shore Hospital here and at hospitals across the state of New South Wales, they've now started doing temperature testing for all people that walk into the building. That is a first. Mel?
All right, Chris Reason in Sydney, thank you. The Prime Minister could choose to make the government's coronavirus tracing app compulsory if not enough Australians voluntarily take it up. The app, which will be unveiled in a few weeks, will alert users to encounters with people who later test positive for the virus. I'm joined now by leading tech expert Stephen Fennick. And Stephen, nice to see you. Just explain to us briefly how this app will work and how long do you have to be in an infected person's company for it to register?
Well, the app is meant to use the Bluetooth connection on your phone to register other connections, other devices around you. Everyone who's running the same app will be then logged anonymously onto a database. Now, you need to be in contact with that person for minutes so that they can be added to the database as well. And if one of those people tests positive, then everyone else who was in contact with that person will get a notification. But it's only really as good as the number of people who actually use the app. That's why Mr Morrison was suggesting he might make it compulsory.
If he does, should we be worried? How much data does it take and when does it stop?
Yeah, I think that's a good question because there hasn't been a lot of transparency around this at the moment. Hasn't been spelt out very clearly. My information is that it'll be a random thing, so random identifiers to whenever you put onto this list. But I think it just needs to be explained clearly just so that people are given some comfort knowing that this isn't going to track them forever. It's in fact going to help us get back to normal life.
Okay. We learned today the federal government set aside $150 million to help with internet bills. Who will benefit from this?
Yeah, this is right. $150 million from the NBN to pass on to their service providers. So we're talking about low-income families, struggling households with school-aged children. They'll be given plans. The fees from their retail service provider will be waived. So it's not just a monetary thing. It's also just being able to give those students, those children in those homes and even those families the connection to the internet that's required now, because people are working from home and learning from home as well.
Yeah, it's vital. Stephen, thank you. Good to chat.
No worries. Thank you.
Well, the number of dead from the Ruby Princess cruise ship has risen yet again, with news another overseas passenger lost their battle with COVID-19 earlier this month. American Chen Xu died a few weeks after returning from Sydney. 21 people have now died due to that outbreak, which remains the largest cluster of the virus in Australia. 4 weeks since imposing one of the world's strictest lockdowns, this Monday New Zealand will make the call on whether they will ease restrictions. If they do, it means some people can return to work, restaurants will open for takeaway, schools will reopen and couples living apart can reunite. Jacinda Ardern has said it also means residents can expand their bubbles, meaning they can interact with other people who have been isolating together. And China has admitted to miscounting the death toll in the city of Wuhan, where the coronavirus began. A further 1,290 casualties have been revealed today, bringing the total to nearly 3,900. Officials say there was a discrepancy in the numbers because people who died at home weren't originally counted. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have spoken about their fears for Prince Charles for the first time since the royal tested positive to coronavirus. Let's bring in Europe Bureau Chief Hugh Whitfeld. And Hugh, what did William and Kate say?
Well, Mel, we know that the royals have had to adapt their royal duties to the current environment, and that means opening hospitals via Zoom and now giving rare interviews via Zoom as well. William and Kate have spoken about homeschooling. George and Charlotte, they in fact didn't tell the kids that the school holidays were on so they could continue with the schoolwork and keep that structure. So there's a tip for any parents who are struggling at home. But William also spoke about the fears for his father, the Prince of Wales, when he learnt that Charles had been diagnosed with COVID-19. He's suffered some chest infections over the years, so there was some genuine fears.
At first I was quite concerned. he fits the profile of somebody at the age he's at, which is, fairly risky. And so I was a little bit worried.
The reason William and Kate are speaking out is because they are really ramping up their mental health campaign in the current climate. They acknowledge that many people who are self-isolating are away from friends and family, and now they are helping to launch a campaign here in England that is called Every Mind Matters. It gives people tools to deal with that isolation, reaching out, talking to people. They've even voiced a TV ad as part of this campaign. So the royal duties continue for the Cambridges despite the lockdown. Mel.
All right, Hugh Whitfield in a very quiet London there. Thank you. President Donald Trump has encouraged state leaders across the US to reopen America. He has issued a step-by-step guide for governors to follow in order to kickstart their economies over the coming months.
If they need to remain closed, we will allow them to do that. And if they believe it is time to reopen, we will provide them the freedom and guidance to accomplish that task, and very, very quickly, depending on what they want to do.
A very different tune from a day ago. Let's bring in NBC News reporter Tracy Potts live from Washington, D.C. And Tracy, the president says the virus has peaked and it's time to start to rejuvenate the economy. But what has been the response from the governors?
Well, some governors seem to be in line, while others are very concerned that their states are not ready. And the president, as you noted, Melissa, has shifted from I call the shots, which is literally what he said, to now saying, well, these are guidelines and states can decide on their own when to reopen. But the reaction, as you were asking, has been mixed. There are people who are very concerned that we're not doing enough testing. We're hearing that from a lot of Democrats and others, that we're not doing enough testing to really know how widespread this virus is. That needs to be ramped up significantly. And there are people, and we've seen protests in the streets in several states with people who are strapped for cash and they want to get back to work.
The protests that you mentioned, which particular states are most up in arms?
Well, when it comes to reopening the economy, we're seeing some states like California, Michigan, even Georgia down south, Texas, some of the more populous states where unemployment is extremely high. We had 22 million people within the last month file for unemployment. They are not working. They're not getting checks. They can't pay their bills. Some of them can't even get groceries. We've seen huge demand at some of our food banks, long lines of people just waiting to get food. So some of these people are very eager in those areas to get back to work, with unemployment as high as 25% in some states.
That is massive. Tracy, thank you for the update tonight. We appreciate it. We will talk to you again soon. Tracy Potts from NBC News. In other news, convicted drug smuggler Cassy Sainsbury has been released from prison in Colombia after 3 years behind bars. The former personal trainer was caught in 2017 with 6 kilos of cocaine and sentenced to 6 years jail. She's one of 4,000 prisoners freed in a bid to reduce the spread of coronavirus in the country's overcrowded jails. But she will have to serve out a 27-month parole period in Colombia. AFL star Lachie Hunter is set to be charged over a drink driving incident after allegedly ploughing into 4 cars and fleeing the scene. Georgia Comensoli is reporting live from Melbourne. And Georgia, what do we know so far?
Well, Mel, that's right. Police say that the AFL star had quite the evening. We know that he was drinking in the hours leading up to just before 9. He's then had a fight with his fiancée before getting behind the wheel of his car, but he didn't make it very far. He was only around the corner when he smashed into those 4 parked cars. But by the time police arrived in Middle Park, he wasn't there. They finally found him and caught up with him a few hours later at what's believed to be another teammate's house in South Yarra. It's there that police have given him a breathalyser test and he blew .123, which is double the legal limit.
When will he learn his fate?
Well, this is quite a tricky situation. So far, the Western Bulldogs club is yet to make an official statement. They say they're trying to figure out all the facts before they say anything, and it seems police could be doing the same. They did give him an on-the-spot fine for violating Victoria's lockout laws, which is over $1,600, and he could be facing fines well over hundreds of thousands of dollars for those smashed cars. But we believe police will be laying charges soon.
All right, let us know. Georgia Comensoli, thank you. Well, still to come, how you could claim $10,000 from the government from Monday. We'll explain how it works. The pub with no cheer, the struggling Outback hotels hoping for an early exit from COVID restrictions. And the weatherman in lockdown and his cat with plenty of personality. That's next on the latest from 7 News. From Monday, Australians who've taken a financial hit due to coronavirus will be able to apply for early access to up to $10,000 of their superannuation. But is it a good idea? Let's bring in Laura Higgins from Money Smart. Laura, this would sound pretty appealing to many who have lost income. What do people need to take into account, though, if they are considering it?
There's a few things that people should take into account, Mel. Some of them are deciding if this is right for them. So understanding the impact it has on their retirement balance is important. Also understanding the impact it might have on insurance, because lots of people have their life insurance through their superannuation. And also thinking about how much they might want to take out. You don't need to take out the full 10. What do you need now? And also thinking about if they have more than one fund, where do they want to take it from? You can take it from one fund, you can take it from a mix, a bit from one and a bit from another. So there is a little bit of homework that Australians need to do.
How much could withdrawing $20,000, though, end up costing people long term?
So that would depend on their personal circumstances, which is why I would tell people maybe to start with Money Smart. We have just released a superannuation withdrawal estimator, so people can go in and get a rough idea. You just type in your age, you type in the age you expect to retire and the amount you might like to take out, whether it's between 1 and 20, and it'll spit out a number that'll give you a rough idea of what it would impact you, how it would impact you. So whether it's if you're taking out $10,000 and you're 30 years old, that might have a $21,000 impact on your retirement. Whereas if you're 55 and taking out $10,000 now, it might only have a $13,000 impact on your retirement balance.
And if and when you're able, can you put the money back in, some of it or all of it, at any time?
You can. So if you just take out $8,000 and you only needed $5,000, you can put that $3,000 back into your superannuation account.
Okay, good to know. And then what about those who are planning on withdrawing the money potentially and investing it elsewhere? We've heard this. Is that a good idea?
I think what's really important is that people understand the risks to their own personal finances. So if you understand what's happening with your insurance, if you understand at what point of the market you're taking the funds out, that's really important to consider that. So if you don't need to touch your superannuation, it might not be the right thing for you.
Who do you think should apply?
I think if people need it and they've explored all their other options and they're eligible, so, they've become redundant or their hours have been reduced by 20% or more, there are people in Australia right now who are really desperate and do need, some help to keep food on the table for their families. It's great that they have this option. You just need to think carefully about the long-term impact and actually how much money you need. Do you need the full 10? Do you need 5 now? You can always go back later if you decide next financial year you need a bit more. And then make a budget, make a plan. How are you going to make that money last?
Great advice. Laura Higgins from Money Smart, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
In small towns across Australia, the local pub is a vital part of community life. One publican in Queensland wants the government to use struggling hotels to test the easing of social distancing rules. Earlier, I spoke to Gavin Ballard, the owner of the Birdcage Hotel in Longreach, and asked how his town was coping.
Everyone's getting by, but obviously you do have, your clientele being in a rural and country area. We have some clients that come in here and have their couple of beers a day, which is their social side of their life, and get some free you're not only a publican, but you're a bit of a doctor and a psychologist in some degree, and a good mate of theirs. So so it's been a bit tough.
So run me through what you want to have happen. You want the restrictions eased?
Oh, look, we're not saying we want them overnight. I guess we're just sort of trying to chase some answers when we're sitting here sort of after 4 weeks, and I know this all takes time, and we don't have COVID out here. We haven't had it since it started, and touch wood, we don't get it. So so that's pretty much what we're aiming to do. Is hopefully we could be a trial area where we're COVID free, and if we could make it work with restrictions that we'd have to do, then they could maybe expand them areas.
Would you be worried? I mean, I would imagine you get a few travellers coming through, but truck drivers, delivery drivers, would that worry you? How would you ensure the community stays safe?
I mean, if there's a traveller coming through, it might be a case of its takeaway for them only, and we're doing that right now through our takeaway meals. It may just be the local people that you let in, and in this town here, we know 95% of people that are in here, and we know who's a local and who isn't.
I would imagine you guys are going to have one amazing celebration when it all does end, and we'll see what happens. But hopefully the restrictions ease off soon for your sake and for the town's sake. So all the best, Gavin.
Thanks very much.
Well, still to come, this is For Real. The weatherman in lockdown sharing the stage with his needy cat. And the story behind a very powerful final frame. That's next on the latest from 7 News. Well, taking a look at the Sydney skyline this evening, where it right now is 20 degrees, tomorrow a top of 24. And Brisbane will see showers and 30 degrees tomorrow, 17 in Melbourne, rain at times in Perth, and in other parts of the country. Tunnable Creek, a lovely 27 degrees, it's beautiful there. Sale cloudy and 17, Renmark possible showers, Alice Springs are reaching 29 degrees. Now, whoever said never work with kids and animals has not met Betty the cat. Indiana weatherman Jeff Lyons had his thunder stolen when his needy feline jumped into his working from home setup, interrupting his live broadcast. Betty has since become an ISO celebrity, making regular appearances as a co-host on Jeff's 7-day forecasts. Behind the scenes, the diva demands have already begun, and Betty only performs in return for treats. And we leave you tonight with two beautiful images that capture the emotions as frontline healthcare workers are recognised around the world. The first one is a nurse. She's wiping her eyes as the New York police and mounted police line the streets to say thanks to the staff at a Manhattan medical centre. And this one is healthcare workers thanking the citizens who were applauding them from balconies and windows in Barcelona, Spain. Two images of courage and hope tonight, our final frames as we edge closer to seeing our way clear of this pandemic. Thank you for your company this evening from the entire team here at 7 News. That is the latest. I'm Melissa Doyle. Good night.